It's like
That's a new update.
nobody sees that except for us.
I know. And at some point, it'll even tell us as people appear and are participatory. Like, I don't know if it'll tell us by what mechanism yet, but
Hey,
as
we're
folks start
back.
popping up. I know, we're back. There it is, the
We're
little
back.
icon's up. So we're doing things. What's up, Terry?
Are we back?
Yeah, we're back.
Oh,
This
the
thing on?
long cold summer is over.
Um, I don't know what summer you were in, but it was not cold.
Well, my heart was cold because I didn't get to spend time with you.
Aw. Who is this Terry? I've never met you before.
I don't know, but I like nobody is joining, so we've
Oh, we got
lost our audience.
nope. They're pretending. A presence is being um, indicated. There's people saying, "What is this?" And so as they look at it, they get to decide. These people are back again.
Wow,
I think
yeah.
I'll doom scroll somewhere else.
Do I push this button or not?
Yeah. Um, so Terry, since we have a very specific agenda for today, my note says Terry Fun Day. Um,
That's right. It's Terry Fun Day.
Terry Fun Day. We will still commence with our super interesting beginning questions of
Oh
random
boy.
insight, random possibilities.
Here we go.
And this one's a little bit easier, but it does match our past history. This summer, what was the best thing you ate?
Definitely was not camp food when I was a counselor. Put it that way. What was the best thing I ate? Wow. You know what's high on my list is there's a little restaurant opened up in town. It's a kind of a fast food chicken place. Jillian actually works there called Chicken Fried.
Mm.
And they have these chicken sliders that they put a chicken tender on a Hawaiian bun that is grilled with garlic aioli and a pickle. And you can get those plain or with buffalo, or if you ask for special treatment, you can get them tossed in their Nashville hot sauce. That's my go-to. That's my favorite. If I my comfort food with onion rings, by the way. So that's probably the best. That's not really impressive. Not been a lot of places this summer, but that's really good. It's big news for Chelsea because it's like a new restaurant. We haven't had new restaurants in a long time. So
That sounds good. It's worth an exploration.
I mean, look, half the restaurants you can't even go to anymore because they don't have any staff to open. It's
Yeah,
kind of depressing.
such is the way of things. Random
Thanks,
economic
yes.
incentives and choices kind of driving new business behavior. Um,
Yeah,
I got to go
for
to
sure.
Torchy's, so I really can't complain.
See, I didn't get to go to Torchy's, so yeah.
Uh, and because who I am, I didn't go to Torchy's once. I went there twice, and tried to go a third time, but I was shot down by the people with me. They said, "You've
I
had
mean,
enough."
I did make some smoked queso on Sunday. That was pretty good.
Yeah,
The smoked
yeah,
queso was up there. I did some smoked brats recently, also good. A lot of
worthy of
things been on the
consideration.
smoker. I mean, you had a good brisket yesterday. That looked
It was
good.
very good. It was very
I'll
good.
tell you one of the greatest things I've ate is I did some reverse sear T-bones. We helped pay for a heifer to be killed. We got half a heifer in our freezer. Well, probably closer to three-quarters now. But your own farm raised beef and you eating a T-bone off of that. Mm, 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 mm. That's probably the best thing I've had. It was good.
That's worth consideration. Worth thinking about.
Yeah.
I, so it is Terry's fun day, so we're probably going to talk about fun Terry stuff at some point or another, like his new designation, scholar color commentator that he has chosen to
Well, I
self
mean,
apply.
I meant to have my book that I'm
Uh,
reading up while I came on the air, but
yeah,
I
yeah.
yeah.
As
The
noted
best thing
earlier, I
about this
just
book, by the way, is it's got really good pictures in it.
yeah, I think that's where your color commentator role actually comes into its fullness. There um, is
I
probably in
didn't
a
color those
coloring
pictures.
book
Yeah,
though,
yeah,
but you can't comment specifically on those colors.
yeah, yeah. I can give you a review on colors
You
for sure.
could.
Yeah.
So at least on the what we're going to do this year, this season, however you want to talk about it, for do the work. I did want to hit on a couple of subjects that were fun to me, at least, but and maybe fun to those who are interested in what we do. Um, One of the things we're going to spend probably an episode or two talking about is the Sermon Builder feature in Logos. I've gotten a lot of folks who have asked questions about it. Terry will probably fall asleep or find something else to do those days. But I think
I'm
it's
going to talk
something.
about the Sermon Builder functions of pages.
And Terry can talk about his alternate life that he lives, where people still use such Luddite behavior. But
Or Terry could also talk about how he has not spent the money on Logos 9 and he's very content with where he's at.
I'm glad that you're reading
Therefore,
books. Let's be fair.
Therefore does not have Sermon Builder.
It is purchasable as a standalone unit. You don't actually have to get Logos 9 to get into that if someone was super inclined to do so. But there's a lot of folks who sent questions like, how do I do this? It's different than what I'm used to. What are these functions work? Why does it seem to always produce things that are like dropping everything into a chart? Do I have to do that?
Why is it so hard to use? And yet you say it's so much better. That's the question.
Different than what you're used to, and you've got to have what you're used to. That's really what it comes down to with all of these things. Because it's different, it's hard. And it is perfect. It is actually specifically designed to fit in the Logos system. And so that means it does some things and it doesn't do other things. It is not a ubiquitous, all your Bible classes, all your other stuff kind of thing. You can use it as an endpoint. You can use it as a builder. We'll talk about it. It seems to be a pretty common question.
Technically it's not a word processor, which is where it falls apart.
Right. It's not, and if you're expecting it to do everything you do in publications and throw images in there in the way that you're used to, it's not. Those are things that from the delivery of a sermon in the context of a big sphere of things actually detract from its role. So we'll talk about it. There are times when it's perfectly good, and there's times where it's just not the thing you would use. And learning how to use those iterations, I think, is really important. What's up, Mr. Emerson? Good to see you.
Things just excelled a little more.
Yeah, they have excelled significantly beyond our past. I want to drop a positive plug for Chris. He's been participating in a couple of groups this off season, if you will, for us. One with Kenny Embry and a few things through his reading a chapter stuff and chapter a day, and I really appreciated those. Good interaction, good work on his part. I still will continue to acknowledge Chris Emerson's otherworldly ability to call in from the golf course or from the ski chalet, but I do appreciate his work.
I mean, I'll just throw those out there. At some point, Chris is going to have people call in for him. He's excelling that highly, but he does good work. We love to pick on Chris, by the way.
Yeah. So a couple other things that are kind of scheduled ideas. We got a couple private questions as to like, hey, are you going to do this again? In particular, the ongoing Bible studies we did last year. At present, we're not intending to schedule through Do the Work any of those ongoing daily Bible studies like we did last year. And so I just wanted to, at least from my side of things, there's a lot of back end in doing that, not just coordinating participants, but arranging all of those pieces and parts. And right now, that's not on the top of our plan. We're going to really narrow in the focus of what the work of evangelist is again, connect, some of the key areas that evangelists, preachers, teachers, deacons, elders as well in that same sphere can continue to get better at the work that they do. And so we're going to, return to that kind of core focus for at least for this, season 4, if you will, as I've got it roughly attributed.
Wow, that's hard to believe, by the way. Yeah. I think we're just going to get back to the primary objective, right, for now, and
Yeah.
that's talking about the work. And there's lots of stuff to talk within about all that. So, um, looking forward to that.
One of the things that Terry and I have talked about last year that will probably appear in a couple different pieces, and I think Chris might also be interested in this as well. We've discussed this before, even actually through some of our broadcasts, is how are churches, how are Christians, how are all participants involved in the process of the work that takes place, preparing for the next generation of evangelists, of preachers, of ministers. And I say that because over the last 2 to 3 years in particular, I personally have noted a steep decline in men leaning into that work at different points in their lives. Young men not choosing it, mature men no longer engaging in that work, and men across all the demographics saying, "Yeah, I'm not doing this anymore." I probably have a much longer list right now of men in the last 2 years in particular who have stopped their service in this role a little bit or altogether, or any other of those spaces, compared to men I know who are planning to preach at any point in their age demographic. And it shows. Local churches, I know far more churches that are looking for the right fit of a man than men I know personally that are looking to move from whatever they're doing to go into preaching or preach in a different venue. Probably at a ratio of 10 to 1. I know 10 churches looking for every one guy that might be interested in taking that work. And Chris has talked before about the congregational level of involvement and doing it internally. Terry and I have talked about internships, mentorships, concepts, but that's something that will certainly take place next year, is to talk about how do we address this.
Yeah, I think one of the side effects that probably is also needed is at some point that's going to lead to decreasing the number of local congregations. There may be some merges and some things that, and we've talked about that before, about maybe that's needed. And this may be a thing that plays into that. But I think one of our problems is we raise our children to almost do anything but preach, and that's a thing that we need to address. And how do we change? I think that starts with, and we'll talk about this later. Starts with changing our mindset about that, and then changing how we talk about the work in general. And so that's a focus we need to start tuning in on a little bit.
Yeah, and there's like systemic attitudes that go across the system of churches that each of us are kind of connected to. And I say system just in the sense that it's organic. We know each other. We're connected with one another. And they are leadership layers. So here's a connection. Let's say you've got a community of disciples in a county somewhere, and the community of disciples present themselves as three independent churches. Although they may all believe, practice, and even have deep connections to one another, and there's no strife. We're taking strife off the table. Contextually, you're going to find a part of that group that says, well, this is way much better because our shepherds can know the flock better, because we know each other better. And they'll say, well, there's 3 times the preaching taking place, etc. Those are some of the positive justifications for behavior. Practically, that's rarely the actual case. I mean, it could exist, but let's talk about the practicality. In most cases, you now have 3 churches that cycle through, can they have elders? And most often the answer is no. Statistically, you're going to have more no's than yeses, U.S. demographics. Secondly, of those 3 churches, 1, 2, or all 3 of them are not able to completely provide the wages for the men who work with them. And so they are robbing other churches to pay the wages of those 3 men, where merging together could very easily solve both of those issues, all three of the men continue to preach. The church may then also actually have shepherds, and more preaching gets done because there's more venues by which they can preach. Yes, on Sunday, you don't preach every Sunday, but you can prepare to teach in other spaces. And so that's like part of these practicalities that even then also connect to better evangelism, better classes, better Bible studies, better internal work, better external work. But it's emotionally difficult to change all of that. You add the last 2 years pressure on local churches. Some of those same groups may only be half what they once were. Not even talking about why. We might talk about why sometime this year too.
Yeah, and you know, in that whole merge conversation, there's a lot of things and questions that become the issues that shouldn't be, but like control of property, which eldership, kind of which preacher, if you're merging and there's more than one. There's a lot of questions that rather than getting past those and doing the right thing, sometimes we let those become the reasons not to do the right thing. So those will all be part of our conversations, you know, sometime and at some point going forward. If you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, probably we talked about the Walmart versus Dollar General concept, and I'm sure we'll dive into that again.
Yep. You know, and not every community then has those same issues. We're only going to be talking about our own individual experiences. If we include the greater world context of the work of evangelism and how we look forward to this year's worth of conversation, there's a number of individuals that Terry and I both know have spent significant years working what we would consider from the U.S. perspective overseas. And their context is different than the context that most American might work within. But we don't view U.S. soil as a foreign work or of a mission field. And we're probably doing a disservice to our work and potential when we do that. You can say, well, this is a mission field, because it is. I think there's probably some space for us to do better there.
Sure.
Also, this is a great time right now. You guys are popping in. There's 10, 14 of you that have kind of appeared at different points. If you've really, you know, we've asked this question in a couple other spaces. If you're looking forward to something this year you want us to discuss, this is the chat space. Let's talk it up. The goal for our conversation today is really kind of let everyone know, hey, we're back. Hey, we've got some things planned. Here are some of the things that are planned. Terry wants to do fun stuff. But we also want to hear the concerns, questions that you each have on the table of, hey, I'm interested in preaching. I preach right now. This is difficult for me. This is good for me. You can send them privately, but you can also just post them in the chat, and we will certainly explore some of that today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We need any ideas that we can address or help out with would be great, and not just limited to preaching, but also, like you said earlier, shepherding. We deal with that, and teaching Bible classes, just other, you know, different parts of the work is where we get and try to put our focus on and help in some way.
Yeah, and if anyone's perfected a filter that can take Edwin Crozier statements and like translate them for me, that'd be awesome. Like, I think
is there an Edwin Crozier statement? I'm not seeing.
No, I'm just feeling like that's probably something that will occur more than once this year, and I'll need that tool to better interact with Edwin when he appears. It's kind of like a planning thing rather than a right now thing. I think it's
the do the work DA. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. And so he'll make his appearance at some point.
I'm Terry, sure he will if he remembers. If he remembers, by the way, that's
he'll forget.
I
was curious. You know, since you had all that free time, since I wasn't taking up a good hour of your day, what'd you read this summer? I saw you with a picture of a book in front of your face, which is a new thing. Hadn't seen that before. You've attributed yourself a scholar. I'm excited to see. Are you reading something? Are you writing something? You know, I need to know this.
I mean, I think we know by now the scholar's a joke. I mean, they Google how to spell scholar. So at the end of the day, you're just kind of having a good time. Currently teaching. I finished up James. back in the middle of the summer. So spent a lot of time and a couple of commentaries on James. One of those that I highly recommend, Douglas Moo's Pillar Commentary. Really like that a lot.
You just want to say moo.
Well, and now I have a Friday morning coffee study. We're going through Romans, and oddly enough, Douglas Moo's commentary there is really good too. Although it's, as someone told me, it's not very good with NPP, the New Pauline Perspective. But nonetheless, Moo's commentary is the highest rated on Romans. I'll just throw that out there. But also teaching Revelation in our Bible class. So, could throw a lot of stuff out there. But so mainly I've been reading stuff in those studies, as you furiously type. And of course, I still, for Revelation, I probably one of my favorite, still the old Homer Haley Revelation commentary. I think he did some good work there, and so spent a lot of time there. So oddly enough, I've been doing some reading. That's crazy, I know.
The real story is Terry
totally
actually
unexpected.
reads. He just doesn't want anyone to know that he actually reads.
Well, yeah. Books are usually for decoration, like the ones behind me, and beyond that, I just here for the fun stuff, as I tell people. So I'm the one part of this, name I've given myself here, color commentator. That is true. I'm the guy, the football broadcast, who's just there to kind of fill in the gaps, and sometimes going to say dumb things, and kind of sometimes like John Madden, I might just yell "boom" real quick, and that's my role and do the work. You, on the other hand, you're a consigliere or something like. I don't even know how to pronounce that.
Consigliere.
Yeah,
it's an advisor.
That's what you are. Yeah, you're
advisor.
You're the consigliere. Yeah, that's what you are. Yeah, but that's been the focus. So a lot of time in, our annual theme. We talked about that earlier on in the year, and it's time to start planning. By the way, if you've not, for next year.
Yep.
But we've been looking at a lot of things that stories of the Bible that tied to Jesus and foreshadow Jesus. So like on Sunday, that was Daniel. And we saw some 14 different connections in the book of Daniel, some of which I'd not really focused on before. So that's been enlightening and good as well. So, but beyond that, it's been James, Romans, and Revelation, which oddly enough, Revelation is easier than Romans for me. So everybody gets scared of Revelation. It's not that scary.
I probably would agree that Romans is theologically thicker,
tougher,
denser than Revelation, particularly if you can create a good link to some of the Old Testament texts. Then Revelation is like, oh, okay, this is a sensible approach to it.
And if you also can treat it as apocalyptic literature and read it the correct way, and for that, I'll just throw out real quick. Oh, another book recommendation: Mark Roberts, Understanding Apocalyptic Literature. By the way, if you've not read this,
it's good,
and you're ever going to study Revelation, you got to read this. It'll take you like an hour and 15 minutes, but it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a good primer that you could read more than once. Going through any of the apocalyptic literature, whether it's
to be clear, it's nothing about Revelation. Others. Yeah, it's not really about Revelation. It's just about the genre, which is really important because so many people know nothing about it. So, Anyway, what have you been doing? There's my rambling about different stuff going on in my thick skull.
So, because everybody needed to preach on Revelation this year, apparently, I've done a Revelation series, which means I've been reading through. I read a bunch in preparation as I wrote the outlines and the plan for the year's worth of sermons. And so some from David De Silva, some from, I read back through Homer Haley's great introduction to the text. Also touched on some old notes with different things from Art Ogden and others internally to kind of think about some of those internal questions, and then moved back and read some wider literature for that. And so a lot of reading there, some R.T. France and others for Luke and Acts, which is this year's adult Bible study, and next year's adult Bible study in part will go through the book of Luke and then the book of Acts as a two-part set. as well as a lot of other related Old Testament readings for going through, surveys of First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, which is, a pretty broad historical space, if you will. It's a lot of reading for that. Went through Andy Stanley's Communicating for Change, kind of adjusted some principles in my sermons and classes in particular. And kind of work through some minor changes, like, hey, let's try doing this. Let's be a little more clear with this. Let's drop some baggage from the visual media and kind of tighten up that. In particular, just really slim down even more so the charts that I use. If it's not scripture, then it's very limited in what goes up there. And they're almost all black and white, black background, white text, justified to one side, because it just looks better on the screen. It looks better in our room. It looks better on the live stream. And so it's easier to read in the end, clearer for folks to have visual issues.
If you'd have read Non-Designer's Design Book, you would have learned the parts line justify a long time ago.
Yeah, and that's where I picked that little tidbit up from. Even though visually, for me, I particularly prefer everything to be centered, and like it makes it easier for my brain. But I realize that just means I'm the weirdo, but when it comes to
which is just justifying bad design because it's your design. That's okay.
Yeah. Terry's just speaking the tribal speak of designers.
And the way the whole world is organized. Let's not forget that.
Yeah. Chris Emerson makes a comparison note, or a little complimentary note. He says, Romans can be tough for members of the church because it is more than just obedience of faith at beginning and end, and chapter 6 is in the middle. There's tons about faith and grace, and absolutely true. The interaction of the cyclical nature of grace comes to its fullness in the text of Romans. It's hinted at in James. It's hinted at in other writings that Paul and other New Testament writers kind of interact with. But really in Romans is where it is most substantial. And that honor-shame culture, by the way, that's the De Silva book, if you're thinking about to get like a really good, shorter introduction to a really, really wide subject, is a great complementary read.
And chapters 9 through 11 are particularly difficult for us, particularly challenging for us, how we digest that and see all that. And look, Romans has been a puzzling book for a lot of people because it can be, just quite frankly, if you're not careful, it can be interpreted various ways. And it's not easy. I mean, honestly, people talk about how scary Revelation is, and the reality is Romans and Hebrews is a little bit more difficult than Revelation, just to really make all the connections and make everything say what I think they were intended to say. And Revelation, your biggest challenge, by the way, is just not to get too in depth in the details, not get so caught up in all the details. And one of the things that I've just kind of kept harping on to everybody is we do Revelation, we read it kind of like we watch a movie, and that's what you look at. You look for the overall principle. When you're watching a movie, you don't try to figure out why the couch was tan instead of white. In fact, you don't even look at the couch. You look at the scene, and that's how Revelation is intended for us to read it. So, so that's the challenge when you get into this kind of stuff. But anyway.
Yeah, one of the approaches I've done when I've been writing out for Revelation, by the way, is I view each of the word pictures that are formed as a postcard or a snapshot. And so once you draw that picture and you get that full interaction with the Old Testament text, then it's those two things together that create the stereophonic view, where you've got a picture from the Old Testament, John's inspired New Testament picture. You lay them out there and you say, okay, now as these set side by side, what do you see? What are the connections? Rather than let's detail, go down this, and we've got to do a verse by verse study and interact with each of these things as if it is a poorly planned adult Bible study.
Revelation, if you're teaching it verse by verse, you're probably ruining it. I mean, it's just, to be honest, it's not intended to be read that way. And So I could ramble all day about that and my feelings about that, quite frankly. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a really fascinating study. It's a really great study, and
Yeah.
there's a great message in there for us today and in our culture. Um, when I teach by the way, you talk about the visions. When I teach the high school students, and I'm going to do that starting in October. We'll actually line the walls. Got this idea from David Banning. We'll use his book because it's better for high school kids, and I'll just teach around some of the stuff he said. But um, and we line the walls with paper, and they draw the visions as we get to them, and then we have in their minds what they think the vision is going to look like, and that really seems to focus us into those scenes. And I wish I could do that with adults, but it's just when you've got 50 adults, it's kind of hard to divide up into groups and draw on the auditorium walls. So, but again, it's fantastic when you think of it that way. Revelation, oddly enough, would make a great book. I mean, a great movie, not a great book. Makes a great book, make a great movie. I'm not sure still we have the CGI to pull all that off. But
Yeah, I
really
think that
fascinating, and whoever did it would ruin it. So that's the other
the
part.
portrayal of angels in the text of Revelation would freak everybody's mind out.
Yeah,
To be
yeah,
fair. Um,
yeah.
so one of the other things, and this is a kind of a hint for this year. Here's the subtitle topic: is making a workbook work for you. There's a lot of questions that have been raised over the last 2 weeks that I got side notes of hey, I like to really teach expository classes personally. And so that means that selection of pre-prepared material then fits in a particular niche for me, a small setting. Like, oh, there's only a few of those that exist, and what do I think about them? Am I going to use those, etc. A lot of folks, though, both in the planning of classes and in the teaching of classes, have a strong preference for either a more survey topical approach, and if that's the case, especially for bivocational folks, deacons, members of the church teaching classes, they're like, I want a workbook. So one of the things we're going to try to do this year is look into how to make a workbook work. How can we take things that Terry and I might complain about at times, workbooks that include, by the way, we're going to pull some of the old standard workbooks that maybe Terry had as a young man. I know I've been handed as this is your class, teach it this
Truth of
quarter.
the Life series. Are we going to go Truth of the Life? Pull those out?
Well, we'll just pick up the concepts from them and say, how do we
Yeah.
make this work? How do you actually turn this into a class that fits your talents and abilities? How do you adjust it from?
How about the old Pink Granville Tyler books? By the way, when I was in Memphis, I had to teach from the old Granville Tyler books for about, I think, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And you can still make that work, by the way. I think that's the thing. That's the challenge.
And so, that's something I think is probably one of the more practical teaching level skills that is going to be more than just preachers, because preachers are going to then take that skill, teach it to some of their members. And look, a lot of super talented Bible class teachers, male and female, do this all this time. You give them a workbook. They say, this is my quarter's material. They slice that workbook up and they make a great class out of it. And so just because it's not something that's my preference, like my approach, doesn't mean it's not good. It just means you're going to have to use a different set of skills to get to that success point. And so we'll talk about this that a couple of times this year too, using some practical illustrations, going through those things and realizing, hey, the Truth Commentary series or Truth Foundation has a number of products underneath their basket now. They've purchased some of these other materials, and my primary complaint about them is that their editing and presentation is dated. They've got some typo stuff, but the content is generally pretty rich and pretty good.
And they got a lot of center justified stuff that drives me nuts.
And so you got to say, okay, what are we going to do with this product? Like, it's what we're going to use. Let's make it good, and let's be practical about it. Like, you're not going to get a lot of those groups to say, well, let's just stop using it. Also, because in some cases there's not enough that much better material available. Like, okay, we can go to this other product, but then that means we're having to do these other steps with it. It's really pretty, but maybe it doesn't have the content we want, or it doesn't fit our overall theme of things that we've planned for 5 years for these classes. And so that's going to be part of that conversation as well, is to make it work. My perspective is any workbook can probably be worked into the teaching program in a way that's going to be positive. And so we'll look at that as well. Terry, we've been up there for a bit of time so far, and so we'll make sure we keep time of our clock. Chris talks about his perspective here, and I'll look at it in a second. But also a couple other things we're going to look at. We've already hinted at it. This is the time where we're planning out our year schedule. So we'll probably revisit the work of a preacher in that regard of, hey, what are you preaching next year? I also want to, Terry and I are obviously planners. It's not the only way. As much as I would personally not appreciate it, what I want to talk about is those who don't preach every Sunday.
I'm just going to say, this is the way. That's to quote the Mandalorian. This is the way.
We're going to give some space to the bivocational preachers. Hey, look, you're only preaching 8 times this year. How are you going to plan out your sermons? Give some space to the guys who, because of the nature of their setting, other things are planned around them, but they're not part of that planning session. What do you do when you're just given this are your topics you've got to cover this year? Like, you need to cover these 12 subjects. We're going to give some space to that in the planning session conversations. And I think it's important because that also is part of the development process of preachers. You'll develop through those things and learn to reach a point that's good for you. I don't think I'll ever return to the decide what you're going to preach 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 day beforehand. That's just not going to happen.
I have some flex spots open, but even those end up being scheduled out a couple of weeks in advance. This is my flex spot. I want to cover this, and you see it coming. It's pretty interesting. And to Chris Emerson's question, I've read that. Chris, we'll cover that when we get to the show for that. We're talking about workbooks, and hope you can join us there. I think that's a great question, and we'll try to remember that. Then, short answer for me is depends on the teacher, depends on the book, and that's a conversation to be had between students and teachers. But we'll get more into that in that specific show.
Yeah, fundamentally, we want to try to avoid the process of everyone reads the workbook and nobody reads the word. And that's not a Bible class. That's something.
We got to understand what the purpose of the workbook is, and it's not the focus. It's a guide.
Right.
So we'll talk about all that, and that'll probably be the very first principle we talk about and how to handle it.
I think that's a good start for hey, we're back, we're doing stuff. It'll be mostly every Tuesday at the same bat time and the same bat channel for those who are of age to understand that reference. If you're not, it just means we're going to be the same time every Tuesday. And we do hope everyone's doing well. If you've got additional suggestions, questions, things you'd like to talk about for the work of an evangelist, hit us up. We're happy to chat about it. Terry, you get to say sayonara for today.
Sayonara for today.
Take care, everybody.